Hey, what's going on, folks? Mike from Gold Coast Customs. Tonight I'm just going to cover with you all just the basic applying epoxy. I get a tremendous amount of email questions asked about, Mike, what tips can you give us? So hopefully I can give you some in this video tonight, a little instruction to let it know how it all goes down. I guess with anything, the one thing I can say is practicing is basically the most important thing. You have a piece of blank in your shop that you can cut a piece and you can do a couple wraps and apply the epoxy. You can definitely learn a lot that. Like you're gonna see now in this video right now, you're looking at, I use pieces of blanks with sample thread so I could show customers about colors and finish, high build, low builds, NCP thread versus nylon. And this, also helps me how to put on epoxy. One of the things that you should get when you're gonna start, is a mixer. Very important. It saves you a lot of work, it's a lot of time, and you really do not want to beat the epoxy with the end of a paintbrush or whatever. You really want to let the mixer do the work. You can use acetone or denatured alcohol. Some people thin their epoxy. I don't necessarily recommend that. I use Pro Coat High Build, an A and a B, two-part. I like the Pro Coat. It does come out a little bit clearer than Flex Coat. Flex Coat has a tendency to turn yellow. And this right now, this rod that we're working on, this is a 7-foot spinning rod that I wrapped, and I had already put one coat on it. And right now, I'm just feeling for any high spots, if I have any thread ends sticking up or just anything bubbles, and I'm just gonna take a really sharp razor blade and I'm gonna go down the blank. And I'm gonna basically just level off those either bubbles or thread sticks, I call them, and just try kind of use your hand to feel the surface. That's really going to be your best thing. I mean, I have a pair of magnifying glasses that you see on my head right there. I got from Amazon. They're like 14 bucks. Love them. They actually sit like a pair of eyeglasses on my head. But once you cut them down, you could use a 1500 grit, like a wet sandpaper, just to kind of take off the surface, the high surface. And then of course, after you're doing that, you're gonna want to get like a piece of tape, fold it around your fingers, and use that like to take up any particulate or particles or dust that you have before you go ahead and start applying that nice epoxy finish. So getting back to that acetone or denatured alcohol. Denatured alcohol is a great thing. It helps you clean your syringes. Syringes, you could basically get those at CVS. You could buy them, or if you want, they do in New York State give away free syringes, believe it or not. So what I usually do is on a 7-foot rod, I will mix up 3 ounces first. 3 ounces of the A part, 3 ounces of the B part, so I got 6 ounces total. And we're gonna throw that right in the mixer, and we're gonna let that turn for about 5 minutes. Set a timer, walk away from it, don't even look at it. After about 5 minutes, I take a heat gun and towards the end of the 5-minute cycle, and I'll just, heat the epoxy up. You wanna make sure that you're working your epoxy, around an 80-degree temperature. Don't hold your heat gun too close to it. You can get your epoxy up to 80 degrees, holding it 13 inches away, going back and forth, and then just letting the mixer do its work. So I'm gonna take the heat gun again. After it sits in the mixer for 5 minutes, I take it out, I let it sit for another 2 minutes, and then I just briefly wave the heat gun over the epoxy in the tub, making sure that I can remove some of the bubbles. And when you throw that heat gun across there, you'll be able to take some of the bubbles out. So what you're seeing here is I don't really like to brush epoxy. Now you'll see me make paint strokes, what look like paint strokes as I'm applying it. But what I really am using a paintbrush for is to pick the epoxy up out of the cup to drop it on the blank. So it does sometimes look like I'm brushing, but really what I'm trying to do is just get it on the blank. And I usually, I'm using my rod lathe that has like a 4 RPM motor on it. I believe it's a 9 RPM motor. And you can see it's spinning pretty slow. So, you know, I'm having to drip the epoxy on the top of the blank and then thin it out laterally up and down to make sure that I have coverage. Now, when I'm pushing it, I call it pushing it with a brush. I'm not brushing it like I'm painting something. I'm trying to drag the epoxy to where I need it. Definitely a headset magnifying glass, definitely need it with like 2 times power. Will definitely aid you in seeing if you missed any of the spots. I usually do 2 coats of flex coat or pro coat or whatever you want to call it. I like 2 coats of epoxy. I don't use a high or low build. I just use their regular build. And like I said, it's just basically using the cup, scooping the epoxy with the brush, and making sure that, as you see there, I had a stray bristle on the brush that I didn't like. What that does is, if you paint it, it's gonna produce more air bubbles that you're necessary. Sometimes you can't even see in the naked eye. You'll put a magnifying glass on, you'll be able to see it, but you'll get these smaller air bubbles underneath, really down by the thread. So you really don't want to mash it up on there. You just want to use that, scoop it up, drip it on. Move along. Go down laterally, make sure you have a nice coat. Make sure every little pocket is taken care of. And especially when you're doing cross wraps, you want to make sure that you got epoxy in where the threads cross. I do use a color protectant, so that kind of seals the thread a little bit. If you're not using color protectant, your thread will soak up the epoxy, and you will notice, that it will. So if you took regular nylon thread and rolled it on a sample and didn't use color protectant and used epoxy, you would see it looks like the epoxy bled into it, and you'll get blotchiness and all that. You want to definitely make sure when you use the nylon that you're using a color protectant before you put the epoxy on. 2 coats, let it sit overnight. Patience. Patience is really the thing with applying epoxy. When I get to the ends, I like to use 2 hands to fulcrum to get my a nice straight line. And usually what I will do is I will drag the epoxy over with the brush towards the end and then hold it. Let the rod take like half revolution, go back on, drag some more over, just so I can get the edge nice and straight. And then we'll use the heat gun quick, up and down quick. You don't want to dwell, it'll make the epoxy run right off the blank. You want to keep the epoxy on the blank. This will release all the bubbles. Use denatured alcohol to clean your brushes, syringes, and using a piece of aluminum flashing to clean up my epoxy. I put everything on there, clean it up, and you are good to go. After you're done putting your epoxy on, you can walk away for about 45 minutes, half hour. Then I would just go back in and check. Take the heat gun, maybe glance it again to release the surface bubbles. At a certain point, you will not be able to fix bubbles when the epoxy starts to cure. And that's what it's all about. It doesn't dry, it cures. Hope this helps, guys. Talk to you later.